The official story of what happened on 9/11, backed by both the Bush administration and the Keane Commission's investigation, is as follows. On September 11, 2001, 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, under the direction of Osama bin Laden, hijacked 4 commercial airliners, flew 2 into the World Trade Center towers, 1 into the Pentagon, and crashed the last in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after a passenger revolt on board. The 2 Trade Center towers burned for 56 and 103 minutes respectively, before collapsing symmetrically at near free-fall speed into their own footprint. Another building, not hit by a plane, the 47-story World Trade Center 7 building, also collapsed at free-fall speed many hours later, allegedly due to internal fires and structural damage from falling debris. While on the surface, this explanation for the 9/11 events may seem plausible, it does not stand up to critical scrutiny. To begin with, if the official story is true, World Trade Center Buildings 1, 2, and 7 all made history on 9/11 by being the first and only steel-framed buildings ever to collapse from fire or a plane crash. Steel-framed buildings have burned for up to 28 hours, gutting the entire interiors, but still not collapsed. The Empire State Building was hit by a B-25 and never collapsed. Hundreds of architects and engineers at ae911truth.org and World Trade Center designer and architect Minoru Yamasaki himself have expressed repeatedly that the World Trade Center buildings were specifically built to withstand an airplane collision of that magnitude. There even used to be an information sign at the top assuring visitors of just that. And since the buildings stood strong for a good hour after impact, it's safe to say the collapses were not caused by the plane crashes. The official story states that fires from burning jet fuel weakened the building's steel beams until they gave way and collapsed. In the past, all over the world, steel buildings have burned uncontrollably for over 20 hours, completely decimating every floor and still not collapsed. Not once in history had one fallen from fire until 9/11, when World Trade Center Buildings 1, 2, and 7 supposedly all did. The National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, reports that the temperatures of jet fuel fires do not exceed 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, and steel does not begin to melt until 2800 degrees. This means they would have us believe jet fuel fires burning 1,000 degrees below steel's melting point for only 56 and 103 minutes on only 8 and 5 floors respectively was enough to bring down the Twin Towers. Even giving them the benefit of the doubt, assuming that jet fuel fires did somehow weaken the steel frames enough to bring down the buildings, how is it possible that they collapsed at near free-fall speed? The official story is that fire-induced structural failure caused each floor to collapse and pancake on top of one another. In order for a floor to fall, hundreds of joints had to break almost simultaneously on 236 exterior columns and 47 core columns. For a 1,300-foot building, 10 seconds is almost free-fall speed. But if each floor produced just a little resistance, so that breaking through each one took a half a second, the collapse of all those floors, 80 or 95 of them, would have taken 40 to 47 seconds. Can we really believe that the upper part of the buildings encountered virtually no resistance from the lower parts? The problem would be even worse in relation to the North Tower, at least if Hufschmidt is right to say that it fell in 8 seconds, which would be exactly free-fall speed. How, he asks, could the debris crush 100 steel and concrete floors while falling as fast as objects fall through air? News footage, firefighters, Ground Zero workers, and other witnesses reported molten metal flowing out of windows preceding the collapse, and huge pools collected in the basement area remaining in molten form for over 5 weeks. For fire to produce molten steel, it absolutely must be over 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and jet fuel burns at 1,000 degrees cooler than that. What can account for this? Professor Stephen Jones, a physics professor at BYU, points out that thermite combustion is a process used in controlled demolitions, which produces high-temperature molten metal. In his paper, Why indeed did the WTC buildings collapse? Jones wrote, "Molten metal was repeatedly observed and formally reported in rubble piles in the WTC towers and WTC-7. Metal that looked like molten steel, or perhaps iron. I maintain that these observations are consistent with the use of high-temperature cutter charges such as thermite, HDX, or RDX, or some combination thereof, routinely used to melt, cut, and demolish steel." The idea that explosive charges were placed inside the building is supported by literally hundreds of eyewitnesses, seismic recordings, video footage, and physics. Firefighters and scores of witnesses on CNN, ABC, NBC, and CBS all talked about bombs going off that day. But once Osama bin Laden had been blamed, it was never again addressed by the mainstream media or the Keane Commission. Teresa Valise, for one, was working on the 47th floor of the North Tower when Flight 11 hit. She was quoted saying, "There were explosions going off everywhere. I was convinced that there were bombs planted all over the place, and someone was sitting at a control panel pushing detonator buttons. There was another explosion, and another. I didn't know where to run." Live on ABC, as one of the towers came down, Peter Jennings commented, "Anybody who has ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you are going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down." After Building 7 came down, Dan Rather, live on CBS News, said, "For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down." One of the firefighters up in the second tower, Louis Caccioli, told People Weekly that, "I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there were bombs set in the building." William Rodriguez, a janitor in Sublevel 1 of the World Trade Center, testified to bombs exploding in the basement several seconds before the planes even hit the buildings. His testimony was completely ignored by the 9/11 Commission report. Also, seismographic data from a nearby observatory showed two spikes of 2.1 and 2.3 Richter at the instant the collapses began. This too indicates explosive charges, because if the towers simply pancaked down, the seismographic spikes would happen when the massive debris hit the ground, not at the start of the collapse. In all, the number of people claiming to see, hear, detect, or suspect bombs in the buildings is staggering. Add to this the visual evidence from footage of the collapse, in which demolitions experts have pointed out squibs characteristic of controlled implosions. Squibs are charges that go off early, below the line of detonation, as the buildings are coming down. If you play the Twin Towers collapses in slow motion, you will notice dozens of squibs blowing out the sides ahead of time. Another massive piece of evidence omitted from all mention by the Keane Commission was the third building that collapsed on 9/11, World Trade Center 7. This 47-story building housed offices of the CIA, DoD, IRS, and the Secret Service, as well as Rudy Giuliani's emergency bunker, and a large SEC database of over 3,000 files on pending Wall Street investigations. At 5:20 p.m., Building 7 symmetrically collapsed into its own footprint in 6 seconds flat. This building was not hit by a plane, suffered only minor structural damage, and had isolated fires on a few floors. Also, demolitions experts have identified Building 7's characteristic kink just before it was brought down. A kink is where the building begins to fold inwards after the central support beams are blown. Standard procedure for implosions, they pull the middle infrastructure first, and let the floors fold into one another, instead of dangerously blowing debris outward. Added to this, in September 2002, World Trade Center complex owner Larry Silverstein accidentally admitted in an interview, "I remember getting a call from the fire department commander, telling me they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. I said, 'We've had such a terrible loss of life, maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it.' And they made that decision to pull, and we watched the building collapse." Since letting this slip in the interview, Silverstein has tried to explain away his statement, saying he meant pull the firefighters out, not pull the building down. But the fact of the matter is he said pull it, a common demolitions term, not pull them out, referring to firefighters. Later on in the same documentary, preceding the controlled demolition of World Trade Center Building 6, a cleanup worker even says, "We're getting ready to pull Building 6. It's typical jargon when imploding a building. In another interesting twist, the British BBC News actually reported on the collapse of Building 7 at 4:57 p.m., 23 minutes before it happened. As the journalist is talking about Building 7's demise, it can be seen still standing over her left shoulder. CNN also had a similar report an hour before World Trade Center 7 came down, saying, quote, "We are getting information now that one of the other buildings, Building 7, has either collapsed or is collapsing." Anyone else curious where CNN and the BBC are getting their information? A few miles away in Arlington, Virginia, the official story states that American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and crashed into the side of the Pentagon at 9:38 a.m. In the minutes preceding, the plane allegedly performed a highly technical 330-degree banking turn, descending 7,000 feet in 3 minutes at over 500 miles per hour. Many pilots have gone on the record stating that this is absolutely impossible, like commercial and Air Force pilot Russ Wittenberg, who told Wing TV, "Flight 77 could not possibly have flown at those speeds which they say it did, without going into high-speed stall. The airplane won't go that fast when you start pulling those high-G maneuvers. That plane would have fallen out of the sky." Assuming a hijacker really did pull off this impossible maneuver, by doing so, he stupidly took the plane away from important sections housing the Joint Chiefs and Donald Rumsfeld's office to a recently renovated, unimportant part of the Pentagon. As news teams arrived on the scene, early footage of the Pentagon shows no skid marks on the lawn, no bodies, no blood, no significant pieces of wreckage, just a small, smoldering 20-foot hole in the wall. After reports of secondary explosions and the roof collapsing, the hole widened marginally, but even then remained far too small to account for a 155-foot long, 44-foot high, 124-foot wide, 100-ton Boeing 757. Small plane scraps were found inside and on the lawn, but most were small enough to be carried off by hand. There were no titanium engines, no indestructible landing gear, no major wing pieces, fuselage, or tail sections anywhere to be found. There were no bodies or blood anywhere either. Yet supposedly, forensic specialists were able to positively identify 184 of the 187 passengers through DNA work. 80 CCTV cameras were watching the point of impact at the Pentagon, including security cameras at the nearby hotel and gas station, but employees said FBI agents came within minutes to confiscate their tapes. All 80 tapes have been withheld from public view for national security reasons, save 5 frames they released that show the explosion, but no plane. The official story states that the 4th plane, Flight 93, went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after a passenger revolt on board. Witnesses in Shanksville estimated the hole was about 20 feet long by 15 feet wide. They said on Fox News there was really no smoke, no fire, no airplane wreckage, no titanium engines, indestructible landing gear, body, wing, tail sections, and again, no blood or bodies. Wally Miller, the Somerset County coroner on the scene, said, "It looked like somebody just dropped a bunch of metal out of the sky, like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it. I stopped being a coroner after about 20 minutes, because there were no bodies there." This was the second time in history that a commercial plane full of passengers crashed and obliterated into nothingness, all wreckage and bodies disappearing. The first time was earlier that morning at the Pentagon. The official government excuse for allowing the attacks to take place was ignorance. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice said, "I don't think anybody could have predicted that these people would take an airplane and slam it into the World Trade Center." President Bush said his first reaction upon seeing a plane hit the tower was, "That's some bad pilot." Bush was busy with an elementary school photo op that morning. Even when his advisor told him of the second plane hitting the towers, he sat reading My Pet Goat for another 8 minutes. David Icke wrote. The president reportedly told the school's principal that a commercial plane has hit the World Trade Center and we're going to go ahead and do the reading thing anyway. Critics find this incredible. If the hijackings were unanticipated occurrences, as claimed, with one of the hijacked airplanes having already completed its terrorist mission, the country was suffering the worst terrorist attack of its history. And yet the commander-in-chief, rather than making sure that his military was prepared to shoot down all hijacked planes, sticks to his planned schedule. This photo opportunity involved, as indicated above, the president's listening to second graders read a book about a pet goat. After Bush had been in the classroom a few minutes, his chief of staff, Andrew Card, came in and whispered in his ear, reportedly telling him about the second attack. But the president, after a brief pause, had the children go ahead with the reading demonstration. Is it possible that Bush, Rice, Rumsfeld, and friends truly were ignorant of the impending 9/11 attacks? Take a look at this timeline of events leading up to 9/11 and decide for yourself. To begin with, most people are unaware that the Bush and bin Laden families have been close friends and colleagues for a long time. Back in 1976, Osama's older brother, Salim bin Laden, invested $50,000 in George W. Bush's budding Arbusto Energy Company. They met through fellow CIA employee and Bush family friend Jim Bath, who handled all the bin Laden family's American investments. By the late 1970s, the Bushes and bin Ladens already owned oil companies and airports together. Larry Klayman, president of Judicial Watch, among others, has confirmed that the Bush family also vacations with the bin Ladens and usually stays at their home when they are in Saudi Arabia. How many know that the Bush family and the bin Laden family have long been extremely close? Or that the former head of the family construction business, Salim bin Laden, brother of Osama, was an investor in President Bush's first oil company? Or that an investor in a later Bush company was Khalid bin Mahfouz, an associate of bin Laden, who was named by the U.S. State Department during the Clinton administration as a funder of the al-Qaeda terrorist network? Or that al-Qaeda was funded into existence by the CIA during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan? Or that the al-Qaeda tunnel systems in Afghanistan were built by bin Laden construction with CIA money, funneled through Pakistan Military Intelligence, the ISI, which is the CIA branch in Pakistan. Since the late 1980s, the Bushes and bin Ladens have also worked together in the Carlyle Group, Washington, D.C.'s largest private equity firm, which deals in the industries of aerospace, defense, automotive, consumer, retail, energy, power, healthcare, real estate, technology, telecommunications, media, and transportation. In 1998 and 2000, George Bush Sr. traveled to Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Carlyle Group and met with the bin Laden family. Then, on the morning of September 11th, as the planes were heading for the towers, George Bush Sr. actually sat in the Washington Ritz-Carlton Hotel at a Carlyle Group meeting with Osama's brother, Shafiq bin Laden. The London Observer reported on this June 22, 2002. Quote, on 11th of September, while al-Qaeda planes slammed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, the Carlyle Group hosted a conference at a Washington hotel. Among the guests of honor was a valued investor, Shafiq bin Laden, brother to Osama. The Wall Street Journal later called for Bush Sr. to resign from Carlyle Group. He never did, but for fear of bad publicity, the bin Laden family formally sold their investments back to the firm in October 2001. They went on national TV calling Osama the black sheep of the family, effectively disowned and washed their hands of responsibility for him. Nowadays, bin Laden Construction still builds most United States military bases in the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia, including the bases in Iraq. The Carlyle Group also has very close links with the bin Laden family, who have been both clients and investors. Father Bush has been a paid consultant to the bin Laden Group. Reports in the Wall Street Journal say these Carlyle investments have been earning the bin Laden family some 40% a year on their money since 1995. The Carlyle Group is the biggest defense contractor on Earth, and the majority owners are the Bush family and the bin Laden family. Both families are profiting hundreds of billions of dollars off America's foreign policy, and Carlyle's earnings continue to rise since 9/11. Osama bin Laden was the 17th of 52 sons of construction baron Mohammed bin Laden. Back in 1979, the CIA paid Osama to recruit and train al-Qaeda fighters. When Bush became CIA director in the 1980s, they recruited Osama, al-Qaeda, and the Taliban in Afghanistan to run their opium trade. Everything changed, however, on December 4, 1997, when American oil barons proposed the Afghanistan oil line to the Taliban, who turned it down after demanding too large a share. A BBC headline from that day read, "Representatives of the Taliban are in Texas visiting the headquarters of Unocal." The proposed pipeline was to be built by Halliburton, whose CEO at the time was none other than Dick Cheney. Shortly after this, the media began labeling the Taliban as terrorists. In 1999, NORAD performed exercises in which hijacked airliners were used as weapons to crash into targets, one of them being the World Trade Center. A USA Today article from March 18, 2004 read, "In the 2 years before the September 11th attacks, the North American Aerospace Defense Command conducted exercises simulating what the White House says was unimaginable at the time: hijacked airliners used as weapons to crash into targets and cause mass casualties. One of the imagined targets was the World Trade Center." In September of 2000, Rebuilding America's Defenses was published by Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, Jeb Bush, and others from the Project for a New American Century team. In it, they said regarding their plans for the Middle East that, quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor." On October 24, 2000, Mascal was a Pentagon training exercise that simulated a Boeing 757 crashing into the building. Back in 1989, Charles Burlingame, an ex-Navy F-4 pilot who worked at the Pentagon for 17 years, also participated in an earlier version of Mascal, crashing simulated planes into the Pentagon. Burlingame retired from the Navy into a job at American Airlines. 12 years later, on 9/11, it was none other than Charles Burlingame's Boeing 757, American Airlines Flight 77, that was supposedly hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. In January 2001, FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill went public that the Bush administration and Clinton's had ordered the FBI to back off investigations of bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Alex Jones wrote, "The next piece of evidence you are about to read is the biggest smoking gun of all. President George W. Bush signed Secret National Security Order number W199I, telling FBI agents, as well as defense intelligence officers, that if they tried to stop al-Qaeda, they would be arrested under national security implications. This secret, leaked document has been in many publications, including BBC News Online, Agency France Presse, and the London Guardian. Lawsuits have now been filed by FBI agents who were outraged by the fact that they were not allowed to stop al-Qaeda. The worldwide crime syndicate that George W. Bush and his family work for has everything to gain from the September 11th attacks: a national ID card, a national control grid, and a cashless society. It's part of the public record. George W. Bush signed the documents threatening defense intelligence and FBI agents with arrest if they stopped al-Qaeda. This is the most absolutely treasonous, treacherous thing he could possibly do." FBI Director John O'Neill was so furious that he quit after the Bush administration blocked his investigation of Osama bin Laden. He was then generously offered a position in the private sector working as Kroll head of security. Marvin Bush was director of Securicom and Kroll, which provided electronic security for the World Trade Center, United Airlines, and Dulles Airport, all three of which were involved in the 9/11 attacks. The head of security position offered to Mr. O'Neill was for the World Trade Center. His first week on the job was the week of September 11th, 2001. CNN's American Morning with Paula Zahn reported that FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill resigned because he felt the U.S. administration was obstructing the FBI in their attempts to stop al-Qaeda. The show went on to report that Bush signed W199I, restricting the investigation. Again, this is high treason and absolute fact. George W. Bush signed this publicly reported document. The BBC has a copy of it. The body of evidence is conclusive. George W. Bush is an intimate partner with bin Laden and a traitor to America. We have already talked about FBI Deputy Director John O'Neill quitting because George Bush signed the order forbidding him to stop al-Qaeda. The reason for his not going public now? Mr. O'Neill is dead. His new job was head of security for the World Trade Center complex, and he died in the collapse of September 11th, his first day on the job. Back in 1996 and 1998, the Sudanese twice tried to arrest bin Laden, but Clinton also ordered his release. This was reported in the Los Angeles Times, the London Times, WorldNet Daily, the Village Voice, and other mainstream sources. The truth is that the Central Intelligence Agency, controlled by Wall Street, has been grooming bin Laden and his family over the last 50 years to carry out dangerous projects in the Middle East, Central Asia, and North Africa. Back in 1996, according to the Times of India, the CIA worked in tandem with Pakistan to create the Taliban. Then, in 1998, when the Afghans offered to arrest bin Laden, the CIA responded by publicly telling them to do no such thing. They needed this boogeyman for one more big action. Through all of this, bin Laden's family was being rewarded with giant satellite company deals, oil company mergers, and some of the biggest construction projects in the world. In May 2001, the Bush administration gave $43 million in aid to the Taliban. In June, German intelligence, the BND, warned the CIA that, quote, Middle Eastern terrorists are planning to hijack commercial airlines to use as weapons to attack America. In July, George J. Tenet, director of the CIA, warned Condoleezza Rice, National Security Advisor, of the imminent al-Qaeda attack, but failed to persuade her to take action. On July 4th, 2001, Osama bin Laden, wanted since 1999, was on dialysis at an American hospital in Dubai, where he was visited by the local chief of the CIA. Alex Jones wrote, Shortly after September 11th, witnesses came forward documenting for the record the fact that bin Laden met with the CIA section chief for 10 days in Dubai in the American hospital. French intelligence was so upset by what they had learned that they purposely published media reports prior to September 11th, specifically warning that bin Laden was planning to hijack aircraft and fly them into tall buildings in downtown Manhattan, as well as the Pentagon. On July 24th, World Trade Center owner Larry Silverstein took out a $3.5 billion insurance policy on the entire complex, which specifically covered acts of terrorism. On August 6th, President Bush's own daily debriefing memo was headed, Bin Laden determined to attack within the United States. Also, in August, the FBI arrested a Muslim militant linked to bin Laden in Boston. French intelligence confirmed the connection, and the FBI learned he had been taking flying lessons and possessed Boeing aircraft and flight training manuals. Later, in August, Russian President Vladimir Putin himself ordered Russian intelligence to warn the U.S. government of imminent attacks on airports and government buildings. Putin later stated, I ordered my intelligence to warn President Bush in the strongest terms that 25 terrorists were getting ready to attack the U.S., including important government buildings like the Pentagon. The head of Russian intelligence said himself, We had clearly warned them, the U.S., on several occasions. Israel's Mossad intelligence agency also met with the CIA in August regarding the proposed 9/11 attacks. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak says that he gave the United States specific warnings that something big was going to happen in New York 12 days prior to September 11th. In an interview in December of 2001, he stated, We expected that something was going to happen and informed the Americans. We told them. Other warnings were ignored from Russia, Israel, Germany, and France. On September 14, 2001, Ananova News Service reported that German police confirmed that an Iranian deportee phoned warnings to U.S. police agencies, including the Secret Service, about the impending attack on the World Trade Center. A month before the attacks, Israeli intelligence warned U.S. intelligence of al-Qaeda plans to attack highly visible targets like the Pentagon, World Trade Center, White House, and CIA headquarters. Dr. Tatanya Koragina, a leading Russian economist in Vladimir Putin's inner circle, in an interview with Pravda on July 12, 2001, stated that America was a giant financial iceberg and that a private $300 trillion group working towards world government was going to launch an attack on the U.S. financial system. During this interview, she also stated that the attack would come in the next few months. An anonymous listener to a Cayman Islands radio station wrote a letter 2 weeks before the attack, which was passed on to a Cayman government official. The letter stated that agents of Osama bin Laden had entered the U.S. and were about to carry out an attack via an airline or airlines. Just a week before 9/11, World Trade Center occupants Zim Israeli Shipping Company suspiciously broke their lease, packed up, and moved out after paying a $50,000 penalty for breaking their contract. Then, on September 6th, there were 4 times the normal amount of put options, bets to go down, placed on United Airlines stock. The next day, more than 5 times the usual put volume was placed on Boeing stock. And on September 10th, American Airlines had nearly 11 times its daily put average. No other airlines showed such anomalies. CIA Executive Director Buzzy Krongard was implicated, along with a few other CIA-related investment firms, as being the one who placed the UA put options, but as of yet, no further investigations have been made. Newsweek twice reported that top Pentagon officials had got a warning of the impending attack on September 10th and cancelled their flights for that day. This confirms that these officials knew both the locations of the imminent attack and the method of using jetliners as bombs. Not only did a group of top Pentagon officials cancel their 9/11 flights, Mayor Willie Brown, author Salman Rushdie, and Attorney General John Ashcroft all said they were specifically warned not to fly. None of them will divulge sources, but Brown said he was warned by an unspecified federal agency. Rushdie was temporarily banned by the FAA, and Ashcroft cited an FBI threat assessment saying he had been advised to travel only by private jet for the remainder of his term. During a CBS interview with Dan Rather, Tom Kennedy, a spokesman for FEMA's National Urban Search and Rescue Team, let it slip that they were sent out to New York City on September 10th. Tom Kennedy said to Dan Rather, "We're currently one of the first teams that was deployed to support the city of New York in this disaster. We arrived on late Monday night and went right into action on Tuesday morning." Paul Joseph Watson wrote, "The National Security Agency intercepted 2 messages on September 10th, indicating a significant event was to take place the next day. The messages were in Arabic and stated, 'Tomorrow is 0 hour,' and 'The match begins tomorrow.' The majority of communication took place between Khalid Sheikh, one of the chief 9/11 planners, and Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker. NSA intercepts also detected multiple phone calls from Abu Zabida, bin Laden's chief of operations, to the United States. Over 30 messages in all had been received by the NSA from May to September, indicating an imminent attack." Unbelievably, with all these warnings, relationships, covert ops, and examples of foreknowledge, the Bush administration claimed and continues to claim complete ignorance regarding the 9/11 attacks. On that very morning, once again, NORAD and the FAA were running suspicious drills. Operation Vigilant Guardian and Northern Vigilance moved New York and D.C. fighter planes hundreds of miles away, where they performed training exercises involving hijacked planes. British MP and Blair cabinet minister Michael Meacher in the London Guardian said, "The first hijacking was suspected at not later than 8:20 a.m., and the last hijacked aircraft crashed in Pennsylvania at 10:06 a.m. Not a single fighter plane was scrambled to investigate from the U.S. Andrews Air Force Base, just 10 miles from Washington, D.C., until after the 3rd plane had hit the Pentagon at 9:38 a.m. Why not? The FAA and NORAD essentially stood down that morning. Any other day, when planes go off course, fast movers are scrambled within 10 minutes to liaison. That is standard procedure, and had already happened 67 times in 2001 alone. Why was 9/11 any different? When giving evidence to the 9/11 Congressional Commission, Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta stated that Dick Cheney knew of the plane heading for the Pentagon, but purposely ordered the stand down. Quote, "There was a young man who had come in and said to the vice president, 'The plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out.' And when it got down to 'the plane is 10 miles out,' the young man also said to the vice president, 'Do the orders still stand?' And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, 'Of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary?'" Well, at the time, I didn't know what that all meant. Norman Mineta's testimony was completely ignored by the Keene Commission report. Former White House counterterrorism expert Richard Clarke told Vanity Fair that on the days following 9/11, when all commercial flights were down, the Bush administration allowed at least 4 private flights with about 140 Saudis, including over 20 members of the bin Laden family, to escape the U.S. without being interviewed or interrogated by the FBI. Not long after, it came out many of the supposed hijackers were or are still alive. Paul Joseph Watson wrote, "As is now well known, at least 8 of the September 11th suicide hijackers either died before the event or are actually still alive. This isn't some kind of internet conspiracy theory. It's been reported in mainstream media across the world. Furthermore, 4 of the 5 named Flight 11 hijackers are still alive and could not have been on the plane that hit the North Tower. Beside the fact that according to their flight school instructors, they could barely fly a Cessna, never mind a Boeing 767. It has been confirmed that 7 of the alleged hijackers are still alive and well. Another one had died already in 2000. The Bush administration and Keene report have nothing to say on this matter. On top of this, September 15th, 2001, it came out in Newsweek that 5 of the alleged hijackers may have trained at U.S. bases. Shortly after, the Pensacola News Journal confirmed that 3 of the hijackers were trained at the Pensacola NAS in 1999. In the following months, it got out that the CIA had been tracking 2 of the hijackers for 4 years, and had actually helped getting visas for all 19. Alex Jones wrote, "It emerged in May of 2002 that the Central Intelligence Agency had officers and assets shadowing 2 of the hijackers. Newsweek ran the headline, 'The Hijackers We Let Escape,' reporting the fact that the CIA followed these 2 men into Malaysia, where they had a meeting with senior leaders of the Al-Qaeda in 2000. The CIA flew out of Los Angeles, closely tracking Al-Qaeda Pakistani intelligence useful idiots Nawaf al-Zami and Khalid al-Madar. Both men attended what the FBI called an Al-Qaeda summit. The American people were shocked to learn that the CIA had been following the hijackers for 4 years. Even after their meeting in 2000 with the leadership of the Al-Qaeda, al-Hazmi and al-Madar were allowed to return to the United States to enroll in flight schools. Reports in the BBC and Washington Times confirmed that the CIA had pressured U.S. embassies abroad and the INS to issue visas for all 19 of the hijackers. The government claims that the lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta's suitcase, was accidentally not loaded onto the flight that day. Inside it, investigators say they found the Quran, a video on how to fly commercial planes, and a fuel consumption indicator. The night before, he also accidentally left a Quran in a Florida strip club. Then another Quran and an Arabic flight manual were found in his rental car. Why didn't he take a taxi? If he was such an Islamic extremist and about to take his life for his religion, why was he at a strip club? And why did he bring his Quran inside? It also came out that Mohammed Atta was wired $100,000 by the CIA through the ISI. One of the biggest smoking guns to indicate that the terrorist attack was an inside job is the CIA's direct connection with the hijackers via Pakistan ISI Director General Mahmoud Ahmad. General Mahmoud Ahmad instructed Ahmad Umar Sheikh to hotwire $100,000 to the 9/11 lead hijacker, Mohammed Atta. On September 11th, Ahmed was a guest of former clandestine CIA officer and CFR member Porter Goss and Skull and Bones CFR member Senator Bob Graham. Since September 4th, he had met with top brass at the CIA, the Pentagon, and the White House, including Colin Powell, Richard Armitage, Joe Biden, and George Tenet. In a statement issued to Al Jazeera just days after the 9/11 attacks, Osama bin Laden said, "The U.S. government has consistently blamed me for being behind every attack. I would like to assure the world that I did not plan the recent attacks, which seem to have been planned by people for personal reasons." Weeks later, Japanese, Chinese, and Indian news reports all confirmed Osama's death. But then, on December 14, 2001, the U.S. government came out with the Bin Laden confession tapes, starring someone whom we are told is Osama bin Laden, yet looks and acts nothing like him. his beard changes color, his skin darkens, and his face fattens. He's actually seen signing a paper with his right hand, even though Osama bin Laden is left-handed. He claims responsibility for the 9/11 attacks and said he did so because he hates our freedom. This fake Osama is still alive and well, hiding in the caves of sheeple's minds worldwide. Now President Bush is seeking to restrict Capitol Hill probes. He had Dick Cheney call 6 separate congressional committees and threaten them, telling them not to investigate September 11th. It took 9 days until an investigation was ordered into Pearl Harbor. It took 7 days until an investigation was ordered into JFK's assassination. It took 7 days until an investigation was ordered into the Challenger. It took 6 days until an investigation was ordered into the Titanic. It took 411 days until an investigation was ordered into 9/11. $75 million was allocated for the 1986 Challenger investigation. $50 million was allocated for the 2004 Columbia investigation. $40 million was allocated for the Clinton-Lewinsky investigation. Only $14 million was allocated for the 9/11 Commission. Is this the kind of effort shown by a government in support of a thorough investigation into these attacks? Once the government finally agreed to an investigation, Bush originally appointed war criminal Henry Kissinger, of all people, to lead the commission. This alone should have been a red flag as to how investigative the commission whitewash would be. Kissinger quickly stepped down due to public pressure, and CFR member Thomas Keane took his place. In June 2002, Lieutenant Colonel Steve Butler, the dean of the Defense Language School in Monterey, California, claiming he was forced to train lead hijacker Mohammed Atta, wrote a letter to the editor of the Monterey Herald. He also wrote regarding Bush's prior knowledge and motive for the attack, stating, "Of course Bush knew about the impending attacks on America. He did nothing to warn the American people, because he needed this war on terrorism. His daddy had Saddam, and he needed Osama." He said that the 9/11 events were engineered to work the American people into a frenzy, which would in turn allow the Bush administration to further its political goals. After making that statement, he was suspended from duty, and motions were made to court-martial him under Article 88. Alex Jones wrote, "Why would the globalists in control of our intelligence community orchestrate such terror? Right after the attacks, Bush's approval rating went from 45% to 90+%. The USA Patriot Act, which effectively eviscerated the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, was passed, radically expanding the scope of the already colossal police-state complex. Their cashless society, compact city control grid is accelerating into place as Americans scramble for security." And David Icke wrote, "Indeed, it almost seems to be a requirement or admission into public discourse to announce that one rejects conspiracy theories. What is the logic behind this thinking? It cannot be that we literally reject the very idea that conspiracies occur. We all accept conspiracy theories of all sorts. We accept a conspiracy theory whenever we believe that 2 or more people have conspired in secret to achieve some goal, such as to rob a bank, defraud customers, or fix prices. It is false to suggest that those who allege that the attacks occurred because of official complicity are conspiracy theorists, while those who accept the official account are not. People differ on this issue merely in terms of which conspiracy theory they hold to be true, or at least most probable. According to the official account, the attacks of 9/11 occurred because of a conspiracy among Muslims, with Osama bin Laden being the chief conspirator. Revisionists reject that theory, at least as a sufficient account of what happened, maintaining that the attacks cannot be satisfactorily explained without postulating conspiracy by officials of the U.S. government, at least in allowing the attacks to succeed. The choice is, accordingly, simply between some version of the received conspiracy theory and some version of the revisionist conspiracy theory.